Leadership is the capacity to influence others through inspiration, motivated by passion, generated by vision, produced by conviction, ignited by a purpose. Miles Monroe. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. Today's guest has built and led sales and alliances teams for the biggest and most successful companies in the country. She worked at Microsoft, Oracle, and Salesforce. Currently, she's Group Vice President, Partner Solutions at ServiceNow. Alix Douglas, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
And excited to be with you. I always leave our conversations energized, and I think a big part of it is you're always smiling. I'm sure that's not always the case, but that's the way I remember our conversations and interactions over, which is now many years.
Many years. I do smile a lot. And I think generally, I have a really positive outlook on life, and there's a lot to smile about. We have it pretty good in this country, and I feel like I have it pretty good in my life. So
that's a perfect segue into what will be a awesome conversation. So, Alix, you've seen and heard a lot. There's a lot of myths in our crazy business. What's a myth that you run across in your leading of teams that you believe is misguided or maybe even complete BS?
So, I think there's this perception that in order to have a high-performing team, you have to lead with a stick, right? And in my experience, that isn't the case. I think when you consider what fear does to us as human beings, right? When we're afraid of something and we're in a fight or flight mode, those are, of course, very necessary chemicals and hormones that are running through our body. But these are things that also cause our breathing to become shallow. Our cells are constricting. We are feeling like we want to ball up, and our muscles are tense. And I think while that works in a scenario where you're running from a bear in the woods, right? That those chemicals can only carry you so far. You're going to have to come down off of that. So for people who are constantly working in an environment where their amygdala are on fire, right? I have found that people aren't productive in the long term. And that, operating from a place of fear, I think, may drive short-term performance, just like it will drive a short-term sprint in the woods from the bear that's running after you. But it's not sustainable. And, I think long-term performance and really strong leadership, over a team is going to require a marathon mentality. And for that, you need to have, you need to lead with a mission. You said at the beginning, there has to be a really clear-cut mission and purpose for a team. But we as leaders have to be thinking about how we motivate and inspire, but also hold people accountable for a high standard of work and work output and performance. I think it requires a lot of energy to do that. But, that's my short story on a myth.
And it is a myth that persists, obviously, because it's done a lot. And I don't think there's probably one, some psycho out there, but most of the time, if you have a conversation with the leader and you say, do you think leading by fear is a good idea? He or she's probably going to say no.
Yeah.
But they do. But the same ones that are saying no are the ones that are doing it.
Because they themselves are afraid.
Why?
Often. I think because they themselves are afraid. And, I think if you're operating from a place, where you remember, I mean, everything is perspective. But for me, as I think about this great work that we do in tech, this industry that for both of us, has, given us so many gifts over the course of our careers. Very, very grateful, to sort of be in it. But I think it's easy to get sort of sucked into this thought process that if I don't deliver for my leadership chain, I'll be fired tomorrow. And then that just rolls downhill to your team. And so for me, it's sort of, I'm going to lead this team to the best of my abilities and capabilities. We are going to drive strong performance over time for this company. And I am going to choose not to operate myself from a place of fear, because I know it will be okay if tomorrow my boss were to say to me, if this is not working out, you need to go find something else, then I would do that. I would absolutely do that, but I don't want to be held hostage by, my own fear, that we're all type A personalities, or I found in technology sales, many of us, right? And, that has to be a very conscious thing and a conscious conversation that we have with ourselves sometimes.
Type A person, I don't know what you mean. So, it rings true. I love what you said. I'd never really heard it said that way before, but the reason why people lead with fear and the stick is because they themselves are afraid. It makes all the sense in the world. I vividly remember a conversation with someone who I know who was my boss at the time, and they called and it was tough times. It was a bad situation in terms of the climate, the sales climate, the economic climate. And I remember him saying, it's like 5 o'clock, let's say 5 o'clock on a Friday, something like that. And he's like, I heard there's not a lot of cars in the parking lot. I heard there's a traffic leaving Burlington, Massachusetts, and going down the street. And I'm like, who are you? What are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm here. I'm looking up. I mean, what you're calling me, like saying that there's people that are leaving?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you're not in the office. It's like, no, but that wasn't my point. The point was this person, that's not them.
Right.
That's not him or her. Like that was that person expressing their fear. And it's like, wait, people aren't in the office. They must not be working. Like this was way before. Sure. So yeah. And people, and he appreciated that I called him out on that later on. I'm like, hey, like, don't lose who you are. And by the way, don't bust my chops with it either, but, easier said than done.
And to your point though, I think having the community of other leaders around us to call us out on those things, to support us when we're feeling fear, whether we call it that or not, but ultimately that's what it is, right? And and often, anger, if you talk to psychologists, they'll often say that anger is just the symptom of fear or sadness, right? Whatever it might be. But in the world of work, I think often the culprit of that anger or that rigidity or that micromanagement is really this fear of, and a lot of it has to do with identity too, right? Like tying my identity to the output of the team and to the success of the team, which of course is really hard to do because you've got to strike that balance, right? Like I'm representative of an organization that I'm responsible for, and I'm responsible for executing against the responsibilities of the role that I'm in. But if my identity is too tightly wound up in all of that, right? I'm unable to separate my id, from what's happening around me and inside of my organization. And then I think I am, not operating from the highest part of my mind.
Is this the Florida State psychology coming out?
Florida State University, our psychology department is very good.
That's all. No, it's true. I just had a conversation with an old colleague of yours, Tony, Tony Rodoni, and we were talking about kind of this whole we went down this road about psychology in sales, and sometimes you have to
Yeah.
be that therapist, that psychologist. I'm thinking about that for the third chapter in my career, Alex. Sports psychologist. You don't need to go to medical school to be a psychologist, right?
Oh, oh no.
Would you hire me for
Heck
that?
yeah.
Okay. So, so you talked about really important things, and maybe I'm married to a yogi, so it resonates that when you fear, your breathing constricts, right?
Yeah.
You don't show up your best.
No.
And when you talk about fight or flight, right, that's the folks on your team, they're fighting with you or they're leaving.
Yeah.
Neither one is great. Neither one is great. Or they don't say anything and they just ball up inside, crawl into the fetal position. And look, that's not helping results either. How do you coach your leaders? How do you coach your people to improve in this area and make sure that they don't lead with the stick?
For me, so much of it is modeling, and modeling what I just described for a leadership team. And then demonstrating vulnerability. I'm a human creature. I myself make mistakes. I am imperfect. I seek, again, to do the best work that I can do at any given moment, but I am fully imperfect. And so I think for me, it's always about connection. It's always about the relationship. And, even at Salesforce, where my team was really large, it really matters to me that I know the individual, right? And that I understand what motivates and inspires a particular individual. Also, what scares them, what makes them uncomfortable. How can I help them rest better in discomfort, right?
Do you ask that?
I do.
Do you ask that question? What, so, because we hear it all the time. What motivates you? What are your goals? I'm a huge believer in that. But I don't. Do you say what scares you?
Oh, yes. Yes. And I'm not what scares me, right? Like I'm uncomfortable in XYZ situation. But I think, we talk about psychological safety a lot, but in practice, it's we ourselves as leaders demonstrating vulnerability. Like that's a really key component, one of the bedrock of it, right? And bringing our authentic selves to the leadership arena. And, I think if I am very open about, and I am, and transparent with a team, as an example, if I have made a mistake, I made a wrong call, I am going to acknowledge that wrong call. And here's what I'm doing to remediate. And sometimes it requires that I have to sort of ask professional forgiveness. Like, listen, I got this wrong. The intent was really noble, right? And you and I have talked about noble intent before. And I think the intent was noble. I really thought with all of the information I had that I was making the right call. It wasn't. We need to pivot, but I want to fully acknowledge that either A, you were right, or the group of you were right, I was wrong, or I just flat out made a mistake, of my own volition. And then by vocalizing that and being transparent about that, they've seen me do it. They know they can come back around and not only share those same things back with me when they feel they've made a mistake. And then, of course, you have to prove it out. You have to earn the trust. I hate when people say, trust me, you have to trust me. No, you have to earn the trust. And so I think, it's baby steps, but over time, when that person can come and be open about the misstep or the mistake or the failure without impunity, right? Without there's no penalty. We have to clean it up. We're going to have to be accountable together. And I'm not talking about poor performance. You and I have talked about that as well. Not the same thing as poor performance. Mistakes are not poor performance. But I think if we circle even back to the fight or flight, you are not going in a fight or flight moment or frame of mind. We don't take risks. The whole point of that is that we were trying to minimize risk for our survival. And in my world, which is a very sort of always kind of startup inside of a company, the tech partnership ecosystem, we're often creating new models, we're breaking glass, we're venture capital without the capital. And if my organization doesn't feel comfortable pushing boundaries and taking risks and doesn't feel empowered and autonomous, then we don't achieve our goals, which are always going to be really lofty. Oh, yeah.
Venture capital without the capital.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Really, really good. Now, I'm still waiting for Bill Belichick to be vulnerable and admit he shouldn't have benched Malcolm Butler in the Super Bowl. But anyway, I love the vulnerability aspect of things, because I think individuals, especially if they're new in their role, like leaders who are new in their role, they think they have to have all the answers, and they think that they can't make a mistake, and that's tough, especially when you're leading through uncertain times. And you in one of our last conversations, you reminded me of an acronym that I was only vaguely familiar. I had to go look it up. VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Right. And so we talked about the importance of leading in times of uncertainty. When you think about the VUCA model, which one of those is maybe the most challenging for you recently? But is it volatility? Is it uncertainty? Is it complexity? Is it ambiguity?
I think for me, and I love the VUCA environment sort of definition, and as you read about it, it's really interesting. But uncertainty would be the component, because in my previous company, we moved through a couple of years of a lot of tumult and a great deal of uncertainty. And all of the other components were there. It was volatile. It was complex. There was a lot of ambiguity.
Right.
But what
they go hand in hand.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. But my team struggled most with uncertainty. Right. So what does this mean? And anytime something traumatic is happening inside of a company or an organization, the thing that we all have to remember is everyone is thinking, what does this mean for me? Right? Maybe at senior levels, we're thinking more about what this means for the company and the organization. But all of our people on the front lines are thinking about, what does it mean for me? And again, the amygdalas light up, and they're going to be less productive. They're going to be disconnected. They're going to be less motivated, all of that. And so how do we motivate and inspire and maintain a psychologically safe environment when there's that degree of uncertainty? And for me, I didn't read any books on it. I just had to really go with my instincts and my gut on how to hold the team through it, the organization through it. And I did that by being as transparent as I could possibly be, number one. Keeping them on a daily journey, staying closer, much closer. Being available and being accessible for one-on-ones, much more so than I would in, the times of bounty. And then being really open about the fact that I didn't have the answers, that I couldn't provide certainty. What I could provide was the ear, was the willingness to just get in a room and kind of just talk through the way that they were interpreting this VUCA environment and all of that. And then by keeping the team and encouraging the team to stay focused on the things that we can control, which in those environments is just, this. It's just those basics. At the end of the day, you have to get up in the morning and you're going to call your partners tomorrow. You're going to put together an account plan tomorrow. You're going to plan for your QBR. We have to take things in bits and bytes. We take it one day at a time. Like those were the kind of tool I deployed during that time. And it worked pretty well, I think. At least that's what my team shared with me, that it helped, but obviously no panacea.
I remember this triggered a thought. And, I love what you said about, being more available. I wrote down some things, but just like being more available, having a routine, going overboard to understand what's going on, to try to alleviate some of those concerns.
Yes.
And I remember some years back, and I went to one of my senior leaders and I said, hey, I need you to come and talk to the organization and kind of help address this. And it's because we started the year June 1st at Oracle, and it was like, friggin' August, and in September, no one had comp plans. And in the call, he's talking to all these people, and he says something like, what's everybody worried about? Like, really, he's like, help me understand. And I said, Joe, they're worried about not getting paid. They're worried about not getting paid, not having money. And the funniest times were different, but he said, oh, I can tell you one thing. He said, if you don't sell anything now, whenever we unscrew this commission check, whenever we get comp plans out, if you don't sell anything now, you're definitely not going to get paid. He's like, so he's like that. I'm like, that wasn't really what I was looking for.
We're not inspiring the masses with it. No.
Oh my God. So, okay. So love that. We've talked about, going down that road, being vulnerable and how to deal with ambiguity. And I guess, do you, Alix, as a leader, do you harbor any like strong beliefs that over time you realize may be a little bit more controversial than you originally thought?
Well, I think what we've just talked about becomes more controversial in VUCA environment. And so where the shorter, and I would almost say easier path, is to revert to the stick, and the fear and the fury. And it's just, you really have to step back and keep your cool to maintain a culture where you're allowing for all of these things. When you've got the pressure, you're in the vice, you're in the octagon, as a leader. And so that, I feel like it becomes really controversial if you don't have a leader above you. For instance, like say your leader above is really good at that when the river's flowing, but here we have a VUCA environment and it's a quick revert. It's an overcorrection, which often will happen. And the tendency, it's a very natural human tendency to go to that. And so I feel like that is controversial. I would say the other thing, and this is kind of a little slightly different tangent, I would relate to women in leadership, which is really kind of near and dear to my heart. And, what that actually means, because, certainly we've come far, but not nearly far enough.
Yeah. So, great segue. It's almost like we planned it, but we didn't, but we'll go there. Before we pivot there, I think you may appreciate this based on some of the posts that I've seen. I think you have an affinity for poetry.
I do, Matt. Yes. I do have an affinity for poetry.
So let's see, I'm observant. A long time ago, it started where I was really crawling into the fetal position. I was afraid. And I remember coming across this poem by Rudyard Kipling, and it's called If.
Yes.
And it was basically, I should be able to,
it's a long,
verbalize it.
It's a long poem.
Yeah, it's long. I have it up in my house. but it basically says, if you can keep your head about you when everyone else is losing theirs,
Yeah.
basically good things are going to happen. And yeah, I just, you triggered that thought. And, just whenever the times are tough, I go and I send out to people that poem, If, and they're like, Benelli, you're sending out poetry. And
What's happening? You're getting soft on me.
I get some range. Get some range.
Real range.
Vulnerable.
It's not
Vulnerable.
It's Kipling. Yes.
So, women in the workforce, we making progress?
Yes, we are. Just not enough nor fast enough, I would say. Like I think, if I look back on just even the last 20 years, I would say 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, most of the women, not all, there are absolutely exceptions, but most of the women that I saw/knew in senior leadership positions were still sort of hiding their authentic selves, right? The part of themselves that was, if they were a mother, for instance, meaning I need to make like my male counterpart in order to fit in, blend in, be accepted.
Can you say that again? You need to what? You need to what like your male counterparts? I missed that.
Be like or make like my male counterpart, where
what does that mean?
I'm not going to talk about the fact that I was up all night with my 2-year-old, right? I'm not going to talk about the fact that I'm feeling super anxious about missing the field trip, or that I'm not home enough and my travel is too much. Like I can't verbalize these things for fear of being seen as someone who wasn't up to the job, right? That might introduce risk to the business because I have this whole other thing happening in half of my brain. And so for me personally, I leaned out for a lot of years from leadership positions because I, number one, felt like I knew my limitations, meaning I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to outsource the kid, although I have no judgment for anyone who has a ton of help. You got to have help even, I have help today, but but I wasn't willing to do it as much as I felt that I would need to do it to do the job that I would be asked to do. And it was in the day and age of like, in my mind, if I'm a sales leader, I'm on a plane 24/7 almost. I'm at the beck and call and mercy of many, many calendars that I have no control over. I didn't feel that I was going to have the confidence to boundaries around the time that I was spending at work or traveling. And when I was traveling, I had to really kind of grow into that. And it was, thankfully for me, 2 male leaders, Mike Wolf and Aaron McGarry, who created space for me and encouraged me to lean in and asked me to trust them, that it would be okay, that I could bring my authentic self to the leadership game. And I'm so grateful to both of them for creating that space. And Mike Wolf knows Tony Rodoni really well and, was equally admiring of him. And I think he leads in much the way that a Tony Rodoni leads. So I was super, super grateful for that. But something happened in COVID as well, which I thought was really interesting. COVID, we saw lots and lots of women leave the workforce, and that was, that we're still trying to recover from that, right? Because they just could
during COVID.
But in my world, what I saw was I also saw for the women on my team, the female leaders on my team, that we were able to prove, and the company was able to prove to itself that, wow, if I as a woman am not on a plane 24/7, I'm still delivering for the business. And the company realized that this was possible for men and women. But it gave me and my leadership team, the female leaders on my team, the confidence to sort of say, okay, so if I am not getting on the plane for this particular meeting next month, I know I'm still executing against the responsibilities of my role. Like I know I can do it, and I'm going to do it at 200%. And so it just created some extra space for us to test some of those waters for a non-standard, atypical way historically of leading a business in the sales world, especially. So there was that. But I think the other piece of it is when bringing the authentic self to the table is modeling. It is the vulnerability, again, that comes with being working mother leader, where I am very clear about my priorities. And from a values perspective, my family is my number one value. Like those relationships are my number one value, right? And I want them to know that. And I want the team to know that. So there's that. And then you and I spoke about something really interesting. You had spoken with someone who had promoted someone who was out on mat leave, a woman. I did the same thing on my team, and it paid huge dividends for our.
How so?
She's one of the, if not the most high-performing woman on that team, female leader on that team after the fact, right? But there was a lot of consternation when we were contemplating that promotion internally about the fact that she was on mat leave. Like this, we should just wait until she gets back. She was coming back. We had the date, right? So that was a real leap for the business. And
but Alix, don't the benefits though? And I know this is rhetorical, but don't the benefits go far beyond performance?
Hugely beyond performance, right? Because then, I mean, the motivation, right? And the excitement and inspiration that sort of bled out across the rest of the team was unbelievable. And oh my, this really can happen. This can work. This company, this organization, this leader means what they say with this. Because we talk so much about DE&I, but we don't actually walk that walk. You know, we kind of like tread around the edges. And so that's an example of really walking that walk, you know?
Yeah. And more than that person sees it and feels the benefit of it and wants to be part of it, right? There's people who, just, want to be, there's a line outside the doors proverbially to work in an organization that does that. So I think that's pretty cool. So kudos to you. And a lot of what you're talking about is all about modeling the behavior, really.
Modeling the behavior. Yeah.
So what's a painful lesson that you've learned in this business that's shaped who you've become?
Well, I mean, there's so many lessons. And I'm such a believer that we only learn when things are hard or when we have to move through something painful. We just don't learn when things are easy and going our way. Just, of course, we're lulled into a sense of complacency, and that's great. Yeah, that's great.
There's a saying, you either win or you get a lesson learned. Well, wait, can't you get a lesson learned when you win too?
Yes, 100%. And I just, when I think about it, and you having, closed so many deals in your lifetime, we make the steps in these deals, the deal doesn't close. Sometimes we learn the most from the deals that don't close and that are the most catastrophic failures where, you've got exposure up to your C-suite, you have a giant extended team that's been relying and depending on you. You called a number for X number of months on this thing and it doesn't close. And worst case scenario, not only does it close, it doesn't push, it's dead.
Which is what happens with most deals that push. They don't really push. They die. You just come to grips with it. Yeah.
But those are the ones that you look back on and you're like, oh, we will not do that again. Right? Like those postmortems are so much more valuable than all of the celebration that comes with the big win. Right. But painful is an interesting word because I don't know that I would call, sometimes it might be a little bit of a humiliating lesson, a humbling lesson, all of these things. But, at the end of the day, I think it's all about growing. It's all about growth. Because hindsight's always 2020. Hindsight's just always 2020 in life and work. So anyway, it's more of a philosophical response to your question.
And we took a huge takeaway from that, which is you can learn when you win. It's just we don't always have our eyes and ears open for that
Yeah.
when times are good. All right, so you're at ServiceNow
Yes.
now. You've been there for about a quarter, so you're a veteran, by the end of the month here. Now, you've been there a short time. What, I guess for the audience, just quick, like what does ServiceNow do and what attracted you to the opportunity? What are you most excited about?
Or, working at a company for like Salesforce for as long as I did, phenomenal company. I'd recommend it to anyone, for all things, working there, buying the products, all of that. You know, commonly understood to have an incredible culture. So when you're contemplating leaving a company like that, it's a really big deal. So for me, I had to be running toward something.
Right. But yeah.
And so I found that through my conversations with ServiceNow, the level of excitement that started to build was just enormous. And what I found since starting is that it is a phenomenal culture, a humble culture, a lot of humility in the ranks. And I think it's because ServiceNow is a company and they do, think of ServiceNow as the tagline is "We make the world work," which is anything related to the service and support of human, both internal and external products, internal and external, the service and supporting of all of those things. Everything that surrounds us every day when we log into our system is what ServiceNow is facilitating. And it started out as an IT service management product in its earliest days. And, how do we make it easier for people to get their hardware and software going to do their jobs? And that's kind of a back office function. And so a lot of engineering mindset in that. And, I think from that was this, like, we're in the mud. It's not a big marketing bluff. We're not selling futures. We're not this. It's just this down in the, guts of things, software that really works and helps people work better and easier. And I think coming with that comes this like really culture of humility and a lot of, I think of Mark is to marketing, Mark Benioff is to marketing what Bill McDermott is to sales. That's kind of how I think of these two CEOs, so visionary and so charismatic. And so to be here and experiencing another version of extraordinary leadership, visionary leadership, is really igniting. So for my particular organization, and I'm responsible for this ISV or this technology partner pillar, it's just the opportunity for companies, third parties to come build on top of this platform to extend and enhance ServiceNow's technology footprint, take us into customers and then into users where we are not today, almost limitless at this point. We have this unbelievable platform for companies to build on. We have a zillion use cases for companies to deploy out to customers. And I mean, what's better than that? Great company, great culture, great people, great product.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there's not a lot better than that. A lot of people out there wish they had it. So thanks for sharing that. So Alix, we call the podcast Coach2Scale. So we bring on guests who care about people, who care about leading and inspiring, with vision versus the stick, the carrots versus the stick. And the people that watch us are looking for practical ideas and looking for, motivation, looking for ideas on how to be better coaches and developers of people. Usually people who care about other people and care about coaching had that behavior modeled for them somewhere along the way. You mentioned a lot of names, but is there someone in particular whose mentorship had a significant impact on who you are?
Yes. I mean, I think I've been really fortunate in my career to work with a lot of great leaders / managers because, kind of both. You got to be a good leader. You got to be a good manager too. But
Right.
Yeah. I mentioned Aaron McGarry. I mentioned Mike Wolf, Tyler Print, also tremendous leader. He leads ecosystem at Salesforce. Certainly those three without question. Andres Ceballos, you may remember Andres.
Of course.
Incredible working for him. Ron Huddleston, who,
Rest in
rest in
peace.
peace. What I
Is there a common denominator across them? If you had, is there something specific? I know several of those folks, but I don't know all of them.
a willingness to get in the mud, not above anything. Everything is their job. Certainly creating connection with their teams. That component of psychological safety existed. Oh, we broke it. Okay, we can fix it. We'll put it back together. Let's get the super glue out, And still holding teams and people to high standard.
Yeah.
But just the willingness to coach, to mentor, to be accessible. And those are the common themes.
Awesome. And just on the topic of coaching, you can go anywhere with this answer, but think about names that a lot of people would know, like, celebrity type names, sports or otherwise. Who's your favorite coach?
Colin Powell.
Why?
So when I think about the modeling aspect of it, right? So I'm incredibly admiring of Colin Powell, have been for many years. I have there are a lot of military in my family, and my father is like a crack military historian. So there's this kind of is embedded in my life, right? And I know there's a million sports analogies for it, but the balance of the humanity with the standard, the high standard, with the willingness to lead from the front. Like I'm leading with you, and that's why, so I have his books, and I greatly admire Colin Powell.
I saw him speak at Oracle, many, many years ago. And it's funny, like you caused me to think a little bit about the military when you were talking about leadership with, through fear and with the stick.
Yeah.
And, offline, I had mentioned I drove up from seeing my father-in-law up to my nephew's graduation from Florida up into Charlotte, North Carolina. And on the way, we stopped at Parris Island, where I spent 3 wonderful months many years ago. And we got on the base, and we were only supposed to go into the museum, but no one's really was policing it. So we were driving around, Carlene and I were driving around, and I'm like, oh my God, those are recruits. Like, they're miserable right now. You see that group?
They're in hell. Do you see their face?
Oh, yeah. And there's this guy doing push-ups on the ground, and there's 2 drill instructors with the Smokey Bear hats, like look mean as hell, like standing over him, yelling. And Carlene's like face is white. And I'm like, roll the window down. She's like, no, I can't roll the window down. I'm like, no, roll the window down. I want to hear it. And I'm like, I'm having PTSD. I'm like, my stomach, I feel like I'm going to get in trouble. Like, I feel like I'm going to get, have to go do mountain climbers or push-ups or do some miserable activity.
Perfect.
And it's like that. But the Marine Corps in Parris Island, it's all about 13 weeks of training you for instant and willing obedience to orders. Like it's got to be, you can't think about it. And so that comes off definitely as more of the stick. And then you learn the leadership aspects of it, later. But yeah, it's not easy. You can't, Colin Powell's books don't help in that environment. Yeah, but you have to be able to go into the mud, so to speak, and do that and come out and that's what, successful leaders do. So,
it is. You have to you have to be willing to make those hard decisions still, right? Like you're going to have to, exit low performers, right? You're going to, if you're in leadership, you're going to have myriad hard conversations about improving performance, over time. And hopefully you can coach those individuals into that performance, and you can have these great turnaround stories and et cetera. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, that's where I find Colin Powell so interesting too, right? Because it's to be the kind of leader and commander that he was in an environment where it is a stick, for all intents and purposes. So much of it, so much of that structure is required, that infrastructure. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a responsibility. It's really, really clear. But yeah, so many people to admire around the world, whether they be, military, political, sports figures, celebrities, you name it. What about you? Who do you greatly admire?
There's a lot of different folks that I could come up with, but I'm going to give you an answer that ties back to connecting the dots here. And I'm going to say John Wooden. And I saw a lot of John Wooden clips recently, especially with Bill Walton passing away.
Really?
And, but, legendary UCLA coach. And Coach Wooden was famous for every time starting with the basics, right? Here's how you put your socks on so that you avoid getting blisters, because if you get blisters, you can't play your best. Here's how you put your shoes on, because if your shoelaces come undone and you trip, you're not going to be able to make the play. So it sounds like ridiculous. And by the way, this is what we learned in the Marine Corps. We learned how to get dressed by the numbers, and it was brutal. It was like you're getting yelled at, but it was all about like putting your uniform on that potentially you'd be going into battle with, like learning how to use all of your equipment, not just weaponry, but your shoes and your socks and things like that. And I think when, I was just interviewed a guest earlier this morning, and, he talked about like hating this whole concept of going back to the basics, because it means that you abandoned the basics in the first place.
Yeah.
If you have to go back.
That's so great.
And so yeah, for that reason, and to those that I've shared, I'd say John Wooden.
I love that you just said, go back to the basics, because it means that you abandoned the basics in the first place. That is really, I'm going to take that with me, Matt.
All right. There we go. I got pages of notes from you, Alex. So listen, I think that's a good place to stop. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about, debunking the myth that you have to lead with the stick. We talked about leading in uncertain times. We, reintroduced the VUCA acronym, and we talked about the importance of having gender diversity in leadership and what needs to be done to get there. And I know we only scratched the surface on that and some of the other topics, but I know you have a day job that you need to go back to, so that you can go to your priorities over the weekend. But Alex, thanks so much for investing time today.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
All right. And for everybody out there watching and listening, thanks for doing that. Like, engage, subscribe. Let us know what you'd like to see more of, guests you'd like to see, topics that you'd like to hear about. We want to bring content to you that's not only interesting, but also actionable. So we'll see you out there. And until next week, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.